there we are again, live. Morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're listening. We've got different time zones working here. So we're going to talk about some of the best books of the last year, about what it takes to be unique, share a great example of being unique, talk about creating value for people in any time, and some really clever pivoting examples. I'm joined by Karie Kaufmann, Judy Guido, and Wade Wyant. Karie starts in San Diego. Judy's in LA? Yes. And Wade, where are you today?
Frozen tundra of Michigan.
The frozen north of Michigan.
Yes, we are watching the wall.
So these are all rockstar coaches in the world of scaling up. I'm going to tell you a little bit more, let them say a little bit more about themselves in just a second. I'm Bill Gallagher, scaling coach, host of the show. And our show here is all about how to scale and grow your business, no matter what the economy is doing or what industry you're in or what part of the world you're from. And you can find hundreds of episodes now with our experts in the world of scaling up. The gurus, the other coaches, some of our CEO examples, tips, things like that, all that at scalingcoach.com. You can also find it wherever you get, like YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts download. So we did live stream here, and then, of course, we got all the audio playback in all of those other sources. So get all that and more at scalingcoach.com, along with the show notes, any tools we reference, and the contact information. The links to all of our guests and speakers today and every day are right there, scalingcoach.com. Listen in now as we have a great conversation about all those topics and more with Karie, Judy, and Wade. Yes, Wade. Wade, start us off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you work, your background, like that. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So the punchline is I'm a recovering CEO, and
I think entrepreneur is an affliction.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So yeah, no, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I exited my last business about 3 years ago. Use the scaling up system. I was in love with it. It helped me in ways like this podcast could never give me enough time to explain. And so I decided I wanted to give back, and I really wanted to help entrepreneurs not avoid the mistakes I made. So I got into this. I've been doing it for 3+ years now. I've got quite a few clients up here in Michigan. I'm really focused on Michigan. Don't do much work outside of that. And outside of that, I've got a family of 4, a spouse for 27 years. And I'm just trying to stay warm here in Michigan in January.
Yeah, I think there's a remedy for that. It's called Mexico.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I'll get on the first plane out of here after this podcast.
Oh, Judy, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. And Wade, I'd say I throw the heat from California, but it's about 42 degrees right now.
Oh.
And I just sent pictures. I've got this beautiful view of the mountains that are all snow-capped right now to my friends back east. So maybe a little bit later, but anytime I can, I'm happy to throw that warmth over to you. Judy Guido, a scaling up coach, and also on the Vern Harnish's board of advisors. I've been in business a long time. Much like Wade, I'm a recovering chief marketing and sales officer, really focusing on strategy. I would like to refer to myself as a business activist. I've always kind of been a rebel. And so I kind of look, where everybody's not looking. Where are those gaps? Where are those opportunities? Be contrarian, be in a pond of one. So, Wade and I are kindred spirits. And, that's kind of what jingled my bells. I do a lot of work in California, but I do, work all over, coast to coast. And I've gone over to UK to do some work as well. I think probably, I think, but the thing that's interesting about my jobs, I've done everything from take a company public on the New York Stock Exchange, which was great, right? Back in 1998, which was a big undertaking, and the only woman on the executive team to do that. Done multiple roll-ups, done over 100 mergers and acquisitions, and I work with billion-dollar companies, but I also work with two-people companies. And quite honestly, I kind of work with both of those entities the same way because the principles are the same. So I'm very, very fortunate to, I love to see where the opportunity is, kind of empower people to help them scale up their businesses.
And Karie, bring it home. Tell us
Good
about
morning.
Karie.
Thanks for having me. I am based in San Diego. I grew up in a family business. So I worked in the family business for a long time. I got a lot of really great experience, but ultimately thought I was too big for the family business. I wanted to move on. I got my MBA, went into corporate America for a long time. And there is a buddy of mine in the office, just a coworker. And he walks into my office one day and he goes, I met somebody that does something I think you'd be good at. And he introduced me to a coach. And that was in 2004. So by 2005, I had met his friend. It really clicked with me, I think, because of my experience in knowing what it was like in the real world of growing a successful business, but also the challenges that came along with that. So I jumped right in. So for the past now, I guess, 16 years, this is what I've been doing. So I've got a husband, Scott, of almost 18 years now, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 3-month-old golden doodle that hopefully you won't hear today.
The golden doodle.
A golden doodle.
The designer hybrid dogs.
Yeah.
Sounds like a snappy song. Hey, piano player, play Golden Doodle for us.
Like golden doodle. So it's great to have you guys join the conversation, and thanks for sharing. I think it's not just the diverse perspective of the four of us, but then all of the clients that we work with now and in the past that give us such interesting stories to share with the listeners, viewers about what's been going on. So first up, we're talking about reflecting on some of the best books in the world of business for the last year. And Vern named out top 5 books for a crisis, top 5 books for the year. And the first on the list was Humanocracy. We had Gary Hamel on the show a few weeks ago. And I love that his book made the list here, talking all about not focusing so much on management. Of course, that's our execution framework, right, that gets it done in. But then, so if you've got kind of that created systematically, what could you change in the way you lead people? How could you empower them and give things away? I loved him as a speaker also at one of our last virtual summits, and was really happy to have him on. How's this affecting you, your clients?
I'll start if you folks don't mind. I describe myself as as a business activist, right? And I've been saying that for a while, kind of a rebel with a cause. I always like to refer to myself as. And when I love the book, right? So and again, and orange is my color, so maybe that was
have it right on camera.
Right. So, yeah, there you go. Please, get it. But it's he talks about that. Like, you have to basically stop being a bureaucrat, right? And you've got to be an activist, right? And bureaucracy, right? And I think his message is wonderful, because it's not that consistency and management of sorts and continuity isn't important. It is. It's just when it becomes so big and so mired and so almost militaristic. And he uses the term, I think it's bureauclerosis, like it's a disease, right? And I love that term. And he said, take that out. And the whole essence of the book is really about unleashing the human spirit, right? And I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I have been in situations, both personally, right? Just, when I didn't have my own business, when I was in a leadership and an executive position, where, literally I felt like the life being sucked out of me, right? Mm-hmm. And, he mentions in here about, right, like, almost losing your soul through bureaucracy. And, we always talk about, people don't join or leave companies. They leave because of people, right? And part of that, is they leave because of the people on top who've created these really onerous situations of bureaucracy where their souls have been sucked out of them, right? Their spirit has been sucked out of them. Their innovation has been sucked out of them. Their creativity. And the essence of the book is really about unleashing that human spirit, right? Like, don't de-skill jobs, upskill people, right? Like, there's plenty of things that, robots can do that are routine, but don't treat human beings like robots, right? I think one of my favorite lines in here, he said, where there may be, a limited amount of routine things you could do, he's like, there's an unlimited amount of problems that we can solve, right? And that's what human beings can do if you allow them to be creative, to unleash their spirit, to give them that sense of ownership and community, and to reward them, and that meritocracy, right? Reward them not because of what their level is, or a 3.1, and they're not a 5.1. Give them a voice. And that's what unleashes the power of innovation, the power of uniqueness. And it was, I agree with Vern. This was one of my favorite books of the year as well.
I think that one of the challenges that leaders have, typically being the smartest ones in the room, right? They got to where they are because they're usually the ones with the answers, and they're used to being the answer guy or the answer woman. And they're just a professional, answerer. So I've learned that, right? Yeah, professional problem solver. Yeah, chief problem solver. So when I've got my clients to accept that they don't have to solve all the problems, and they ask their teams, like, what should we do, or what could we do better? And one of my favorite questions, one of the highest quality questions I think you can ask yourself is, how can it get better than this? If things are good, how can it get better than this? If things are not good, how can it get better than this? So I've got them to start posing those questions to their teams. Like, how can we make this better? Even if it's already great, how can we make it better? When they engage their teams in being creative or solving problems, first of all, they come up with, a lot more and better and more diverse ideas than one person could. Second of all, they own the solutions, right? And they're engaged in the process to implement the change or to do things even when it's harder. Because it was their idea, their inspiration.
Wade, you got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, there's the line of 2020, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I muted just out of noise respect, but that kind of backfired on me. I would echo everything you said. And for me, 2020, I started the year with the theme of human potential. And I got that because, Elon a year earlier had tweeted out how he said it ends up humans are underrated. And he did that because he found out the automation in his factory had kind of bit him in the butt, and he had to go backwards and focus on the humans. And so 2020, every year I start with an idea or a word to focus myself and my business around. And that was it. Unfortunately, 2020 was the year that it was, but still, we saw a lot around human potential. And this book coming out and being a focus book was really dovetailed nicely into that. And for the way in which I use it is, ever since Harvard came out with that business article touting the idea of removing the middle management layer, or that the concept that you could, not touting, I should say, the concept you could in the businesses that have, and you've seen a lot of business owners kind of laser into that, especially when they hear about it, or when Vern talks about it in some of his summits. I've always looked for a template to help them. There really wasn't one prior to this. Sure, you could go read that. You could go read about the article, and you could go do some research, but there wasn't a good template. Not that this book is, but it's the beginning of that. And that excited me because I could say, take this, change your thinking around humans, and then all of a sudden that layer starts to not be as necessary. And then you can repurpose them. And the beautiful thing about that as well is that as you repurpose those humans and you unleash them and unleash that human potential, you're not just going to get the cost savings of that extra layer management. You're also going to get the potential that they have locked up in them that you've never released, because you encapsulated it into this almost World War I, World War II thinking of, here's how we go to war. And since then, we've gone to business that way. And almost 100 years later, we've got to start thinking differently. So to me, it unleashed a lot of the templates that I needed that I just didn't have to help people with. And so that was exciting.
Yeah, many of us have seen that funny org chart where the head of the company is the chief idea killer, and then he's got the VP of no underneath him, and right. And you think about a bureaucracy, right? It's a bunch of places and people designed to contain and control something, which is kind of the opposite of empowerment, like asking the question and coaching, what do you need next? And how would that work? And what's most likely to go wrong? And how do we deal with that? And like helping people to solve problems, empowering them is very different. And there's a time and a place for regulatory bodies and bureaucracies, but hopefully our companies aren't ones I remember one of my early career things, I learned how to get something done in a big, many 1,000-person organization and start a new division. That was a tough thing, right? Because everybody thinks that they've got the shot at killing your idea. It takes very thick skin. And of course, as entrepreneurs, we're like, oh, we're awesome. We're not like that, right? We're the ones out championing stuff, but our customers, our suppliers, our people kill our ideas. And then suddenly we find ourselves being the one who does the same with those. If you want to hear a little bit more about that, go listen to the recent episode we did with Gary, where he talks a lot about that. He's a great guest, great conversation. He really brings it to life with a lot of stories and examples, that kind of thing as well. One of my biggest takeaways, if you're going to go and empower people, it's lead more with questions. Stop solving all the problems, as Karie talked about. Stop telling people what to do. Start using questions and being the last one to speak. And I think that, like, as a leader, that's kind of the personal shift. I think that makes all the difference in the world.
Yep.
Bill, I was going to say one of the two words that always go together that I hate, and people like, when I say this, people say, gee, that seems so unlike you and so off-brand. I hate the term best practices, right? Because to me, best practices are, it's like a line in the sand. To me, I call them BPBs. I'm like, your whole point is to make best practices better, right? Like there's another B on it. Like you've got to make those better and I think that's what happens with bureaucracy, right? They become like, well, these are the best practice. Like this is the template. This is the tablet, right? It's set in stone kind of thing. And, I think some of the facts that I loved in statistics in this book, I remember there one that, it said something like 20% of people never felt like their opinion mattered, right? More, like 40% like just felt that they were never encouraged like to innovate, right? And it's, you're thinking, the whole point was they, the reason why they were robotic, and, people, and I think it was even, Elon Musk, he said, be careful because pretty soon, right, robots are going to take over what we do, and the point is, yeah, if you continue to treat people like robots, right? I mean, I do about 65% of my work in the green industry, which is one of the most incredible, fascinating spaces to be. Yet probably, more than 40% still refer to their these really, incredible field people as laborers, right? And I mean, how many times have you heard me say, it's like we had slavery, we had indentured service, and laborers, like whoever wanted to grow up to be a laborer, right? And, how many of our kids have come to us and say, hey, mom, hey, dad, when I get older, I want to be a laborer, right? It's like words matter. Like, labor is much like a robot, like a robot. And I think he used the term, people were almost like these meatless characters that were just, they were kind of just the human side of the robot. So again, kind of unleash that human spirit and, enable them to be innovative and creative and listen to what they're saying and what matters to them. So anyways,
I think if a leader is really ready for a potential slap in the face, a good question that they could ask their team, especially if they do little employee surveys once in a while, is, do you feel that your potential here is fully utilized and appreciated, right? Is two different answers. Because every time I've had a leader do that survey with their team, they're always surprised that people feel like they've got more to give than they're being asked to give, that discretionary effort. But nobody's asking. So
and he mentions, I think it's close to about only 18% of people in the workforce feel that way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Really sad.
One of my favorite questions, right? Combating the labor. So labor is a particular role. It's maybe not a very good term or whatever, but we're like, marketing director or VP of sales or CTO or head of engineering, whatever the role is. If you get put into that role, it becomes confining in some way. And it's useful to ask yourself, right, who is the person on your team who's got the potential and interest to become your COO? Who's the person on your team who's got the interest and potential to move into marketing and who's currently in sales, right? think about those things where people's talents and interests aren't really recognized because they're in their role, and they might not even be doing well in their role, right? They might be a mediocre salesperson or middle of the road, but who really has some passion around some other area of the business or whatever it is, right? Customer service rep or that kind of thing, and really their interest lie in some other place. We start to think of them as that title or that functional role, and we lose sight of that potential that they might have.
And that's the beauty of dynamic teams as well, right? You're taking cross-functional or cross-departmental, whether the proper way of describing it is teams, and allowing people to work a little bit outside or a lot outside of where what they deem as their role. And you get the good that gets developed out of that. So the good for the organization, but then you also get people to start thinking outside of it. And that's where job sharing and not shadowing in this classic sense of it, but where you force a salesperson to go spend a day a month with whatever the operations is that's delivering the product they're selling, so they understand it better. Or you get operations to go out with the support people and understand their perspective of supporting whatever they're making or selling, right? So it's that cross functionality, drawing that out and being aware of it, that helps a lot of humanocracy, because then people are interacting with people, and that peer mentorship as well, where it's not I'm mentoring down to you, I'm mentoring across to you, and you're mentoring back across to me. And we do that a lot in the scaling up community, peer-to-peer mentoring between coaches. And I find so much value in talking to someone who's my peer, as opposed to, I obviously have a coach, but I almost find the peer mentoring, peer coaching better than the coach I have that's not talking down to me, but is pushing down into me as opposed to across to me.
Mm-hmm. We'll come back to coaching conversation soon enough. Next book on the list is Fanocracy, about turning customers into fans into customers, customers into fans, right? That having people being raving fans, really excited about you, willing to promote you, and what a difference that makes. David Meerman Scott has been a frequent speaker at our summits in the past, a past guest on the show. We talked about that. I also have an episode with David Meerman Scott talking about this subject, but he noticed that he and his family and many of us are rabid fans of different things. And how can you leverage that into some other group? I have a friend and former coaching partner and stuff from years ago who was talking to me about a really novel thing. He's like, hey, why don't you leverage that unique thing you're interested in? Like, your business is in this. And he's like, oh, you're a coach, that kind of thing. Then combine it with something that's unique and interesting. So what are the things that you're really passionate about? I'm really passionate about sailing. I'm really passionate about surfing. He's like, great, start a group of people, CEOs who want to grow their company and also surf, and then go out surfing with them and talk about that. And you'd be the only one who's doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And people rave about it, right? Before the pandemic, one of the things that I frequently did was take groups of CEOs and C-suite leaders out for sailing on the San Francisco Bay, which, if you've never done it before, is a very exhilarating experience, not a typical warm water sailing outing like San Diego Bay. It's very different up here. Anyway, but that created something very unique, and people would rave about it, and they would post photos of it and that kind of thing, which is not a normal way that we do. Are any of your companies doing a great job building fan bases and really engaging people, and it's kind of that rabid advocacy? And
Bill, I'll jump in here because I'm pretty proud of one of my clients. The company's name is Volta, and obviously I have permission to talk about them, or I would not do that. But Volta is in the green energy space as well, Judith, and they do anti-idling technology. So they take very large battery packs, build them into large mobile devices or large mobile units, or whatever the proper way to say is semis and trail and RVs and things of that nature, boats as well. And they make it possible so when they get to some location, they're not running their auxiliary motors, or they're not running their main motor. They're not idling to keep everything running. They can just use the battery technology. And they're primarily in the RV space right now. It's a space that's adapted this technology faster than the delivery space and other spaces. And so they have built all this technology, and they've got these and you think of them as a production company, because they're building battery packs. They're installing that into these devices, and you just think of it more of just again, traditional manufacturing, but they early on started on this path. And I think that's the key to fanocracy, is that obviously you can start anytime you want, but the earlier the better. When's the best time to plant a tree? 30 years ago. When's the second best time? Today. Start today. And they did. And so now, of course, their systems aren't perfect and there's always some challenge, but whenever there is and someone gets on social media or whatever, they've got thousands of fans just coming on to defend them, talk to those. Sometimes their fans will call the client who's having a challenge and help them figure it out and realize it wasn't the system. Very, very often it's not. And so they have had just, this is a manufacturing company in Michigan, which is a classic example of a Michigan company with fans all over the country who not only promote their product, but defend it. And the trajectory of growth is just unbelievable. And a lot of that is been fed by their fans and their use of social media. Not that social media fixes everything. I think that's kind of a buzzword right now, but there is that connection they have. And it's made a huge difference for them in a space where it's hard to make noise. And again, they're just manufacturing, not to belittle the organization, amazing organization, but they're manufacturing and they've figured out a way to promote that.
I have a couple of clients that have done a great job at building community, similar to Wade's story, that it's about I suppose a group of enthusiasts. So one of them sells high performance auto parts online, and their tagline is "We race what we sell," because they started the company, it was started by an attorney who hated practicing law, but loved to race his car on the weekend. So he just started this little side hustle. And I was actually coaching his wife's business. And she came to me one day and said, "Hey, my husband is running this business that he started as a hobby, and he now hates it because he's drowning in it. And he's running a 7-figure business out of his garage by himself. So how can we build this into, more sustainable company?" But they started building this community just with online forums. And like Wade said, where the community would crowdsource knowledge and sharing and ideas and share pictures, and just really built a fan following around some of their products were their own, and some of them people could buy anywhere. But they wanted to be the ones that people went to because they were the enthusiasts, they were the experts. They weren't just somebody locked away in a big white warehouse somewhere. Like, they felt like they knew the owners of the company and that they know what they're talking about. If I want the real deal, the people who are just like me, I'm going to buy from these guys. And they did a great job at that. And another client of mine in a completely different type of scenario, they sell these little frozen banana pops. And they're in the process of franchising this little, they do events and they have a little shop and they do deliveries, but their mission is to spread happiness. And so the CEO's got bright pink hair, and so they're big on social media, but probably at least half of their followers have never had a banana pop from their shop. They love the vibe. They love the feeling. Like, when they talk about spreading happiness, they exude that, and their fan base it's just fun. There's nothing serious about it. It's not an expensive product. It just creates a sense of fun and community that people just love. So they've leveraged social media probably amongst the best to help draw their following and create their fan base.
I think it's so cool. And one of our great examples in the latest edition of the Scaling Up book and a Scaling Up success story is Haggerty Insurance. They're all about classic cars and vehicles in general. But they built this huge following, embracing the passion of people in this, and then turned an unusual insurance company into a powerhouse in their sector, right?
Yep.
Bill, I think you said a key word there, right? Passion, right? Think about it. Whether it's what you do in your life or what you love, why you're really good at something or why you really love something is because there's a passion and there's an energy behind it, right? And I'm listening to all three of your examples, right? The passion that's involved in all that. And I think the other thing, the commonality that I hear amongst all three of your discussions is around things that are unique, right? And and one of the things that obviously, because there's a lot of sameness in the world, like something is cool and hip, and the next thing everybody and their brother's doing it, right? If, for example, you mentioned insurance, right? I'm kind of getting a little bit sick of seeing every single insurance company now kind of has their fun spokesperson, right? Like it kind of started with Flo. What was it? Flo and Jamie. It was great.
Oh, yeah.
There's another company who has it.
Then you gotta.
Like it's like, oh,
Man.
let's get a quirky kind of spokesperson. I must admit, I do like the guy about the, don't be like your parents. I do like him, especially when the person with the purple hair goes by and he goes, we all see it. Okay. We all see it. Don't look, kind of thing. But, like everybody's kind of jumping on the bandwagon. The thing that's really important is it's got to be unique, but it's also got to be useful, right? And so, everything that you guys mentioned is useful. One of my favorite clients, they're in a space, right, in the green industry. They're a big commercial, commercial maintenance and design build and kind of, a water management company. And a lot of people think of those companies are, commodity companies. And so one of their focuses, when they say that they're green, they really are. I mean, they're really into water management and doing things with less chemicals. And a lot of people in the industry say it, but they don't do it. Their kind of proof is in the pudding. And one of the things that they decided to do was for both weed abatement and fire abatement. And this is a company in California where, right, fires are prevalent and, there are weeds all over, but right, obviously. So they needed something to, solve both, clearing, areas for fire abatement as well as weed. And so they started using goats, right? And so they kind of created this goatscaping, right? Why? Goats eat weeds, they clear the area, right? And it was unique and it was useful. And all of a sudden what happened was you talk about social media, their social media lit on fire. And it was their clients, it was companies next to them. It was neighborhoods that said, they were all out there, advertising and being their biggest fans saying, these people are using, these goats are all over. At first we were like, what the hey is going on? And now we realize, right, it's keeping us safe. It's keeping our wheat, costs down. It's, there's no,
it's adorable.
There's no, but it was a great thing. And it was like,
look, we have them all over the hills here. The goat landscapers, right?
Yeah, we've got them here too.
Right. Yeah, and Gina was a company, so it's just like again, raving fans, and again, it was unique, and it was people became fanatical about it, which is that's the word fan or fanocracy. So.
Every time I put the goats along one of the little walking or hiking trails around the hills here, and they got the little electric fence around them and that kind of thing, people keep their dogs off. But people start taking videos. I know I have of the goats walking around the whole thing, and they make their silly sounds. And right,
they've created more great YouTube and social media. I mean, again, other people, and they've got a good gal in there that does marketing as well. But all that footage the majority was provided by their new raving fans. So
how about if we mix goat yoga with goat
with landscaping?
So while they're chewing and doing the fire abatement, they kind of sit down and then they take a little pause and kind of do it.
Somebody else is making cheese.
I'm gonna noodle this over, Bill. I'm a noodler.
Certainly, if we can circle back to Hagerty Insurance, because I know McKeel, he's a good guy. He's right here in Michigan, and I think one of the things that they did from a fanocracy standpoint that's really interesting is, I mean, they're an all-in scaling up company. They've used all along the way, and they not only did they develop fanocracy, but they early on they discovered who that core customer was. Right? They said these are the people who buy from us. They don't complain. They're happy. They'll pay the rates. And they discovered it was those classic car people. And what was crazy about it is that any other insurance company could have discovered this. And this was just, and I know the family, I know McKeel well, so I can say this. I hope you won't be angry at me, but it's just some small insurance company in Traverse City, Michigan. If you don't know where Traverse City is, it's a pretty small city. And they discovered this thing, and then they exploited it, and then they developed the fanocracy. And I'll tell you, I just drove by their headquarters the other day. I was up in Traverse City, and I mean, they live it at every level. At the very front of their building, they have a big round window area, and there's a classic car sitting in there turning. And so when you walk in, the very first thing you do is you walk by a classic car. And then not only that, but the authenticity. And I think it's the other word too. You talk about focus. If you want fanocracy, you have to have some authenticity inside your company. You can't just one day go, well, and the GOAT example, I'm a GOAT fan, and I think that'll be a way to make some money, and then try to be a GOAT fan. If you're not you don't have authenticity there, you're in trouble. And I can tell you, because I've been in McKeel's garage, he has got the most unbelievable classic car collection you could ever imagine. And it's been accumulated over time as they've scaled up and they've done well. But he is a huge classic car fan. So he has that authenticity. And the final thing I'll say is that if you are a classic car fan, you got to go subscribe to their newsletter, because they took an idea in that industry, which is the idea of barn finds. So if you're a classic car person, everybody talks about these legendary barn finds. Some guy or gal walks into a piece of property and talks to the owner and finds out there's some car in the barn. They open it up and it's this, oh my goodness. Well, they've taken that and gone and done it. And the stories are really cool. And they've tracked down some really neat cars. And even if you're not into cars, just the history of how they found them and tracked them down, it's very, very entertaining. And so not to take it off the goats, I love that story too, but because it is here in Michigan and it's such a big scaling up company, I wanted to circle back and reemphasize it, that this idea of fanocracy has roots into all parts of the scaling up thinking. And it kind of binds a lot of the concepts together. So again, when's the best time to do it? Start today and be authentic. Be very authentic in it.
I was going to say,
classic cars. I'm like, immediately a whole picture arises, and you might not be a fan, but there are triggers that create a whole image, right? You said that, and I'm suddenly remembered, oh yeah, I was out buying an old BMW convertible for our daughter's first car. And as I'm going through the thing, I noticed kind of an unusual bumper kind of under a cover. And I'm like, what's that? And he lifts it up, and it's an old Pantera. And I'm like, oh my God, that's a cool car. And he's like, oh yeah, it's not ready to sell that one yet. But already I was like, let me buy that.
Well, you're probably also, while you're doing this, you're probably right, smelling things and feeling things, right? Yep. So like, right, as you're saying things, like some of my favorite are like the old, MGB, the convertibles, right?
Oh my God,
right?
Yeah,
the touch of the a classic pale yellow coffee color convertible, like 1966 Volkswagen with a flat dash, and I could feel the metal and the big oversized like wheel, right? And you could go in it, you could feel your knuckles and hands on the wheel. You could smell all that stuff. I mean, there's a lot.
British Racing Green, the tonneau cover, the hexagon logo.
I was going to say, one of my favorite, and I don't like to call them customers. I always like to call them my relationships. I don't like to, call them customers or clients, because they really are relationships. And, you really open a relationship with somebody when you work with somebody for a long period of time. But it's a company in St. Charles, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago. And the name of the company is called Aquascape. And a crazy, wonderful guy by the name of Greg Whitstock, when his affinity when he was a little boy for frogs, when they were moving, he wanted to take his frog and build a place, in their new home that was safe. And he created these building ponds as a little boy and turned it into this multi-million-dollar company called Aquascape. And they are so passionate in the way they do things, from their world headquarters, which looks like a mini Google in St. Charles, with, the largest green roof in the United States. And they've created such raving fans, is because what they've done is they've taught people, the importance, of having water features, sound, smells, just, things to calm people down, right? De-stressing people never go out. And that's pretty much what this whole business is about. But it is this ecosystem where you can get everything there. And he created years ago, he invited some contractors. So not only could they learn how to do it, and they'd actually have these builds, but how to market it, and the technical side of it, and the build at the community, and that started maybe 12 or 13 years ago. And now every summer, it's kind of like a mecca. It's called Pandemonium, where people come from all over the world to come to this place. And when I say, literally drinking the Kool-Aid, and I've spoken at it many times, they drink the Kool-Aid, and they've gotten, they had such a fan following that National Geographic reached out to them, and they've had their own television show. I mean, how many of your customers have their own, right? They're called the Pond Guys, right? And so, the Pond Stars, kind of a play on Pawn Stars.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
The Pond Stars, and it's, for the people, Ed Ballou and the whole gang. But they had such raving fans that literally they, their ultimate was, they were sold, a TV show. So, I mean, you never know what's going to happen. So, And as a matter of fact, they're even in the Webster Dictionary. The word aquascape is now, it's a definition, right, for a water feature. And they became the water city capital of the United States. So, I mean, they really kind of took their, their uniqueness and their differentiation and created a whole empire or a whole
Yeah, talk about owning a word. Nice work.
It's a great, right?
That's
great segue to our next book. David Marquette's Turn the Ship Around is all about the power of language, the hidden power of what you say and what you don't say. And I've long been a fan of that. One of our other formative books is The Laws of Performance, all about the power of leadership. Vern shares this book with a story of turning around the worst submarine in the Navy to the best in a short period of time through the use of language, empowering others and managing things. And I think language is such an underrated thing, but as leaders, it's one of our main levers, and it's far more powerful than the sticks we wield or the clumsy, misapplied things of compensation and that kind of thing that we often do. How do you guys grapple with language and the power of language with your leaders and in your practices?
I mean, I'll start it. Even, like, as I said, what I refer to myself as, I'll give you an example. Probably about 4 months ago, I'm acting as an outsourced strategist and a sales marketing, leader for this company. And, they've got some big clients, and I was, part of this presentation and everything was going well. At one point, one of the engineers in the group kept referring to me as their, their chief, sales and marketing officer. And, kind of paused. And I said, actually, I said, so-and-so, I said, I really like to refer to myself as a composer, right? The marketing and sales and, composer, right? Because what a composer does is he or she really gets out, right? It sets a flow of energy and rhythm and cadence. But the whole point of a composer is really to build, pull out the best in each person, right, in that orchestra. And so, and I said, when you use the word officer, and then, I think he's like, well, maybe you're the director. And I'm like, an officer is such like a militaristic word, right? And I'm thinking, again, it's exactly what I don't want to be thought of as a director that's top down, but really more, right, as this composer that really does help to get the best flow of energy and cadence. And again, really brings out the best in each individual. So, we talked about this before we even went on today, right? Words matter. Right. And, what I share with the folks that I work with, as well as my family, my daughter, one of my favorite lines are, words can wound, or words can wow. Right. So you have a choice, yeah. Right. So think really, really carefully. Right. Do you want to wow somebody, or do you want to wound somebody? And so be very, very particular about the words the words you select. And, I think a lot of us all write. I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I'm writing, I'll just stop painstakingly over one word has just kind of just halted me. Right. And I'm like, oh my God. And, sometimes my daughter will say, you're really obsessing about this. I'm like, it is, because this word is so important and I don't have it yet. Right. So then I'll kind of stop and I'll do a brainstorming session. I've got all these different, thesaurus I use. And sometimes I'm like, if I can't find it, I'll make up a word, right? I mean, I've made up words, I always call myself, right? I'm an askaholic, right? We were talking about questions. I'm like, it's a socially acceptable disease. I am an askaholic. I ask what I hope are really targeted, intelligent questions, right? And, while it may be a spinoff of the word workaholic, those are the things that, you want to think about, about creating your own words when you can't find them.
In my world, questions, right? Asking probing questions is a great way to engage people and give people voice and increase the perspective. And we use a lot of ways as coaches to ask questions, right? So that's one kind. And then making promises, making bold promises and declarations change the future, and the way people see things is a powerful thing, right? When Kennedy stood in front of the nation and said, we choose to go to the moon, right? And he changed our whole view of the future. He made a promise and a declaration before the nation and engaged all of us in something as a country, whether you were alive then or not. And I think so that is one. And then those questions are particularly bold and make a huge difference in that. But then also watching the whole tone. So some of us, I'm one who's guilty of using swear words for punctuation and emphasis at times. But if you watch and you notice that you use a set of generic business words, right? We talked earlier about best practices. It just becomes nonsense after a while. And I had a guy in a CEO advisory group years ago who just spoke in one jargon thing after another. And I remember one CEO turning to him at some point in a usual tirade and said, "Dude, what the hell are you talking about?" You just said, buy low, sell high, what a bunch of nonsense. I have no idea what's actually going on. And I think you watch that. The other one is, like, if you want to create value and take care of people, but use violent words all the time, watch yourself, right? What are you actually creating with the words? What's your vocabulary? It makes a huge difference, that amount of awareness and intentionality.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I totally agree on vocabulary. And I'll tell you, I recently wrote an article on this one, which was setting expectations. For years, I used that term, and I do everything I can not to use it anymore. Because as I really sat down and thought about it, and this book highlighted this big time on the idea of gaining commitment rather than compliance. And when I would use setting expectations, it was typically me going to someone. It could be me going to someone who's a superior. It could be me going to someone I was managing. It could be me going laterally in the organization. It didn't really matter where I was going with it. My kids set expectations with me every day. But the bottom line is, when you go and set expectations with another human, it's you pushing out what you desire, and you're not gaining a commitment from them. You're just simply setting the bar. And humans love to not meet the bar set for them unless they have bought into it and they're committed to it. And so, from my article and a lot of the work I've done with business leaders, I've said, look, first off, I'm as guilty as the next person. I've been just a terrible leader in this space, but let's all take that out. And then now, as we go out and we work with again, top down, down up, whatever it is, whatever the relationship is, let's make sure we're working to replace the word setting expectations and gaining commitment. And the only way you gain commitment is the language you use and working together on that. And so when we go into KPIs, which I'm a strong believer in, and I'm a strong believer in understanding what the critical number is and all those things, while we may not always agree, we've got to go in there with the desire to gain commitment. And at the end, like Lencioni says, once we've had healthy debate, and if everybody doesn't agree, at some point the group makes a decision, and then you have to commit to that because you were able to be part of the conversation and then leave, as long as it's not unethical or illegal or immoral, obviously. But as long as it's not those things, then we gain commitment and we move forward. But that as a leader, if I could unwind anything in my language from the last 20, 30 years, it would be that I'm setting expectations. Like, no, I want to gain commitment.
Communication's a mirror. So if you're not getting the response or the commitment that you hoped for or expected, you've got to look in the mirror and say, what did I communicate or not communicate that caused that to be the response? If it's the lack of commitment or the disagreement or the confusion, maybe that's left because you didn't communicate clearly or effectively. And another thing that a lot of leaders, I think, underestimate is that there's multiple pieces to communication, and that words alone, while they really matter, are still only 7%. 93% of communication is in tone of voice, rate of speech, volume, body language is over half. So using all the tools that they have at their disposal, which is why I encourage them to stay away from email as much as possible, especially if it's something important, if it's something you really want people to understand or you really want their commitment to, that you've got to use all the tools you've got to make sure you're really sending the message that you want. And in order to ask yourself, how can I say this in a way that's going to influence, that they're going to receive what I want them to receive, and they're going to respond and engage or commit in the way that's going to help achieve the common goal.
Karie, that reminds me of Vern's been promoting this since about this time last year. He was at Steelcase, which is headquartered here in Michigan. It's become one of his go-to slides. I was with him that day when he saw how they do their standing meeting in one of Steelcase's biggest factories here in Grand Rapids area. And the they have their list of how you communicate. To your point, it's like how you do it is almost as important as what you say. And they're like, it's face-to-face first. And then they use this thing called Voxer, which is an app they use, which it's similar to WhatsApp and a lot of other ones out there. And they go right down the list. And the last thing is email. So yeah, that's, it's so important. So important.
A great illustration I've used and learned many, many years ago was the sentence, "I didn't say you were smart." And so I'll give that to a group of team, especially a team that's like, "Oh, we just live by our Slack or whatever." I'm like, "Great. Here, read this sentence out loud or in your mind to yourself and just emphasize a different word and read it 6 times, right?" And they, start off with, "I didn't say you were smart," and "I didn't say you were smart," and "I didn't say you were smart." And in each thing, they're thinking about it and they're realizing it has very different connotations. You see quickly how text and small text-based communications can just go downhill, or the amount of agonizing, painstaking time people spend composing it, trying to imagine all the different ways somebody might get it and speaking, and then they write some huge thing when if they picked up the phone and just talked to each other for a moment, and like it would be so much more efficient, right? That takes us to kind of the next thing, the kind of culture that you're creating, the kind of company. One company that's having a massive year this year is Netflix, right? As so many people have spent a lot more time indoors the last 12 months. And a lot more time at home has been binge watching Netflix, which was already doing pretty good from years of development as they moved from one-time CD rental company to live streaming. But they have a very unique culture and a way of leadership that makes a huge difference with all of that. So no rules, Netflix, the culture of reinvention. It's a great look at the business model and the growth of the company and like everything, how they run and how they've evolved that business. But that culture of freedom and responsibility, the kind of culture that you create, right? Look, we've all heard about weird cults where people ask you to marry somebody you don't know and give up your thing and stay away from your family. But what if you created an intentional cult, right? A culture of your own design, a good kind of a cult, right? And that's what we're talking about. When we think about some of the most admirable companies that we know, some of those striking examples, they are somewhat cult-like, right? In their following. $1 trillion company out there, I don't know, Apple Computer. Very cult-like in its approach, right? Lots of companies that we most admire have unique things. The root of the word culture is cult. So think about what are those practices? What I know many of us do that. What do you guys do? What are some of the most common things that you do, or even the ones that people really resist that that work?
I was just going to want to comment on one thing you said about Apple, right? This, we, we're both Mac and PC, but we are fanatical about our Apple products, right? All of them. And I think, my daughter, it was just one of those things that got thrown in the face. Her, I forget how many of her Christmas gifts were new Apple products this year, right? So that was like her big list. But her favorite thing is right when she gets that new phone, and she called us to the table. She's like, "I'm going to do it now." She's like, Mom, come here. I'm going to do it now. And I was like, "What?" She's like, "Come here. I'm going to do it now." And she's unwrapping her new phone, right? She's unwrapping it, right? And it's the box, right? It's the whole point about like the packaging, but like how you lift it, right? And how like that sucks the noise and how like you take it off. And like to her, it was like as good as getting the new phone. She's like, "Okay, I'm lifting up the box," and and then it slowly drops down and she takes the packaging out. But I was like, "Oh my God." She was so engaged with just opening that box. And that for her is, it's part of the whole experience for her. That's what an Apple fan she is.
And it's true, like, think about the whole experience of it, right? There are now these unboxing videos that are very popular with technology and some other products. But in that anticipation, that Christmas moment or whatever it is for you that does that. But it's true of other products and services as well. I remember hearing, I want to say it was YoPlay, yogurt product managers talking about the sound and the smell of, and what they engineered around the opening of the foil top on their unusual shaped yogurt container. And you'd pull off that thing, and there's a sound and then a release, and all the people were really tuned into that, and it took them a little bit to discover that. But what's the discovery and the thing that you think about for the people interacting with your company? I know I think about it with our clients, like what environment, when we do an offsite meeting, what does the whole setting look like? Are there smells that greet them because there's food or coffee or that kind of thing on arrival? Is there music playing? What kind of music do I play in the morning, at the break, in the afternoon, at different points, right? Like music is a huge thing for me, but the sound, the location, the view, all of that whole experience of stuff, does it feel fun? Does it look alive and inviting for a fertile discussion? What's the experience with your product or service? I think is really useful. We're going more to the customer side of things, but then there's that whole, like, think about the applicant coming into the company for the first time. What does the environment look like? What's the front lobby? How are they greeted? What do they smell on arrival?
I coach a consumer electronics engineering firm. They design consumer electronics, a lot of products you probably own or have heard of, and they're fanatical about design. So while you might think, I coached lots of engineering companies actually, and most of them are engineers. The stereotypical, everything you would picture when you think about an engineer, just, they don't care a lot about the frills. They're intellectual, they're there to do their job, they're very technical. But these guys, because of the types of products they design, they just value design. So when they're now moving their office space and they're trying to be so intentional with it because they want their space to represent who they are, and for their employees who might be working on a very nuanced mechanical piece that in and of itself isn't beautiful, but they don't want them to lose that connection to somebody who's going to have that in their home. They're going to ride that for exercise. They're going to wear that. They're going to, whatever it is. So they're just so intentional with crafting their employee experience to best represent and keep the feeling of live of the experience that they create for their end user, which might be multiple, companies in the supply chain away that, they're at the beginning of the supply chain. So they might never physically touch the end product, but it's still very much a part of how they operate, which is it's a cool environment. I've never seen an engineering group like them, even down to how they design their core values and how they flow and how they package the experience for people. It's so intentional.
Yeah, it strikes me, a couple things strike me as I listen. And first thing is, obviously it's easy for us to go right to the consumer level, but the book really focuses on the internal culture. And what strikes me about that, a couple points, is that first off, the great companies that have great consumer products and get that right typically have great cultures internally. Not always, but they typically get that right as well. And I think Netflix, from all measurements, is a good example of that. And what I loved about this book and what it really helped me with was, for a while I've talked with my clients about how, yes, the fundamental is you have to get your core values, but that actions you live by, that in some ways to me is more critical. And I believe, and I'm a strong believer, and I push my clients to this, is that you don't want just 5 actions you live by that create your culture. You want 25 or 50, maybe even 100. And if you look at the summary of this book, or you just highlight it yourself while you're going through it, but I got the summary in front of me right now, there has to be 100 different ways or actions they live by that created that culture. Everything from the unlimited vacation policy to the way they did expenses, to the way they treat each other, had discussions. I mean, Reed went through and not just that individual, obviously, but a lot of people in the company built that culture via those actions they live by. And then you read this book and it's like boom, 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 boom. And for the companies that I work with and leaders, I'm like, you need to have, if you don't have that written, then those are unwritten rules that everybody has to learn. And that doesn't do anybody any favors, because people are always shy about building out their actions to live by because they don't want policies, right? They don't want to go back to the 80s and 70s and 60s where we had a whole bunch of company policies. But but that being said, you still have to have those things because people are going to find them one way or another. And so I encourage them, for the first couple months that you're building out this thinking, have a piece of paper at your desk that all it says is, either aspirational values or actions to live by or whatever you want to name this list, and just start listing them out, because they're going to come to you over time. They're not going to come to you all at once. And then at some point, refine, make sure they're right. Because the other thing too is whatever you put out there, whether it's unspoken or unwritten or it's written, is going to define that culture, and it better be right or you're going to be in trouble. But then get it out there, because you don't want someone coming to your organization who's new having to figure it out on their own. Why not give them the guide map of this is how we behave. These are the actions that we live by. And that's what I loved about this book, is it just gave a perfect example of really no one else has done a good job of this until now, in my opinion, of showing that concept of, no, it's okay to have 100 actions to live by. It's okay to have 100 different ways we behave. Get them out there and then live them.
Everybody take a deep breath. Breath is the title of this book. Breath, the New Science of a Lost Art. Burns' recommendation for something personal to think about. And so much in this year, we've had to take a breath and chill the F out, right? And be calm in the face of the next lockdown or the whatever, the next bit of craziness in our social political world, right? And then think about what's next, but breathing intentionally, learning to move up or down, right? So many folks out there have become fans of the Wim Hof method or Kundalini breathing, to bring energy up, to down, to activate, to engage, to calm, to reflect, to recover, all of the different things, altering the way you breathe at night. I've done a lot of study of breath work in the past and as part of mindfulness practice development. Do you guys do anything with your clients, or do any of them do any of it in their sessions?
Yes, some of mine do, and I, one of my dear friends and business partner too is Susan Packard, the founder of one of the founders of HGTV, and she wrote this great book on emotional intelligence, and and part of what she does, she does a lot of corporate and school and offsite meditation. I mean, so much of that emotional, she refers to it's not just about emotional intelligence, right? It's about emotional fitness. And part of that, right, is that balance and that calm. And I've learned a lot of, meditative just techniques and breathing techniques from her. And here, and, a lot of people say that's kind of wonky. I'm like, when you think of, if you ever met Susan, she's a pretty high powered COO of, Created Scripts Network, advertising, hardcore driving, intelligent businesswoman. Susan's not wonky at all. Susan's really smart, right? So what I've kind of done is say, how can I bring that to my, my life and my clients? And I always say, does anybody not want to be calm? Does anybody not want to be distressed? Is that really that's wonky? When you're off the, sometimes my family will tell me, and as a matter of fact, a member of my family told me this morning already, called me you're being Tasmanian already, right? That's Tasmanian devil. And I was like, I've got 12 minutes before we're going to the blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden I was like, and back to the loving space, right? I kind of grabbed my coconut, right now this is kind of me. I've got my caffeine and I've got my coconut water, right? It's kind of Tasmanian devil in my, in my calm. And, for me, it's very important. And I use Susan's techniques and things that I've learned to, breathing in and just taking a moment. I encourage everybody, whether you're home or you're in an office setting or wherever your setting is go out a couple of times. Even if it's cold, even if you're in Michigan, for me, I need to feel sun. I have to feel that, right? I have to feel that. I always say, I just need to feel air, fresh air on my face. I need to breathe it in, right? I'll generally grab my little dog, not Toto, Breslow, and take him for a walk and physically move. But to me, sometimes it may be just 10 minutes. I mean, I can feel myself go from Tasmanian, to very, very calm in a matter of minutes. And, I love that term, head trash. It just helps me empty my head trash, right? It helps me get my rhythm back. And again, and I'm no different from anybody else. And, it's just a couple of minutes to, again, and breathing is a big, big part of that, just to calm and get you to that place. So
I'll admit I'm not great at this. I go through seasons where I do okay, but as a general practice consistently, my breathing is probably very shallow. I don't pay a lot of attention to it. I get the little notifications on my Apple Watch that it's time to breathe. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that later. I'm too busy to breathe right now. But I'm curious if any of you have ever tried the mouth things that Vern talks about for sleeping, that forces you to breathe through your nose. Because I feel like that would make me extremely claustrophobic and panic ridden. So curious if anybody has any experience with that.
I haven't, but I can tell you one of the things that I've done to try to help to bring the human side of the scaling up coaching to life is I've partnered with a retired Navy SEAL and done presentations with him. And he was in SEAL Team 6, and people talk about Dev Grew and they hear about it. But what most people don't know is that team, there's only 200 members of it, and there's 2,000 SEALs at any given time. And Dev Grew, they're 10% of all of the U.S. Navy SEALs, but they get 51% of the budget. So they get to experiment with all kinds of stuff. And so he comes in and he speaks to a lot of the executives I work with. We do it together and does some really, really neat things. But it's amazing how much time he spends on breathing. And in one of the last summit we were all together scaling up, that was one of the SEALs there talked about that as well. I think it was in Anaheim, if I remember right. And so there's a lot to be said about that. But what really struck me and what I just could not believe was that the SEALs, you're talking young, very fit people, very, very fit people. At night, they do whatever they can to make sure they've got their breathing right at night. And so you get the whole like, well, and now again, I'm not advocating for CPAP machines or any of that. I'm not a doctor, so I am absolutely not advocating for it. But there is some science to the fact that, and that was proven to me through this experience with this SEAL friend of mine, that it's not just for people who have challenges. Everybody has got to breathe through their sleep cycle correctly. So to answer your question, I haven't tried it, but I love that question because it really inspired me to go, wait a second, am I breathing at night correctly? Am I getting because I was like, that's wacky science. And I didn't really buy into it. I always thought it was well, my dad needs to worry about that, but not me. And then this young SEAL is like, no, man, like you don't get this. You're in trouble. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should listen. So I will tell you, I haven't gone down that path yet, but I am listening way more than I did in the past on that whole subject.
Let me know if you give it a shot.
Let me get a couple of things out to just try with your teams right away. So one is a couple of big deep breaths, then calm down. Close your eyes and do a couple of big deep breaths. Very centering, get ready to transition into something, end something, move into something else, right? That can be really useful for centering, calming, and creating transitions. Another one, if you really need to calm, is breathe in and out to a different count. So we can breathe in through your nose if you want to a count of 4, and then breathe out through pursed lips to a count of 8. If you do that a little bit, you'll be expelling more and you'll get yourself down to really lower your heart rate, really calm the F down. So breathe out for double the time. If you just do that, forgetting like if it's going to be in or out of your nose or whatever. Another one that you can do is hold one side, breathe in one, and then breathe out the other. Doing that a little bit intentionally will help you to center and do. And there's more you could read about the value of each of these approaches. But then here's another big one. If you need to now go present, generate something, come on camera, take the stage, walk to the front of the room or whatever like that, you could do things like get music going to psych yourself up and like start to get the blood flowing. But you could also do things like get your heart rate up, breathing while you move your hands, or pumping up, or doing things like that. So adding a little bit of aerobic movement with some rapid breathing, not hyperventilating, but really raising the whole heart metabolism up. And then maybe bring it down for a second and then come out with just a ton of energy ready to like give out. Those are a couple things that I use pretty regularly.
Go look at the word you just used, right? Probably 8 or 9 times in that. the word was calm, right?
Calm.
And look at what's one of the most popular apps right now, right? Just even right those right the calm and even it's kind of ironic. You'll be watching the news, right? And who's been advertising big time, right? It's calm. And I don't know about you guys, but because the news has been so crazy, like when that commercial comes on, right? And you hear the rain and stuff. Sometimes it's a 15-second commercial. Sometimes it's a 30-second commercial. But every time that that calm commercial comes on, I mean, I'm like, close my eyes. I listen to the rain. I'm like, 15, 30 seconds of greatness. So that's right. That obviously has become popular. And I just wanted to, add on to something Wade said. And first of all, Wade, you kind of look like a Navy SEAL today, by the way. So, right. You got that SEAL look going on. Between undergrad and grad school, I actually dated a SEAL. And at the time, this was way back when my dad was in the Navy. And I didn't know what a Navy SEAL was, but he told me, he's like, yeah, I'm a Navy SEAL. I was working in the Virgin Islands at the time, and one of the ships had come in, and we met, and he's like, yeah, I'm in the Navy. I was like, oh, my dad's in the Navy. I'm like, what do you do? He's like, I'm a SEAL, and I was like, he's like, well, we're kind of like just a special group. He's like,
you were supposed to be impressed at that point.
Yeah, but he wasn't. He was very actually low key. So he was like kind of like a Green Beret, but he didn't make a big thing about it at all. Well, the point of the matter was, this guy, what really kind of attracted me to him, first of all, he was extremely handsome, but was his sense of humor. I love humor. He was the funniest, silliest guy that I ever met. And probably when you think about a SEAL, top of mind wouldn't be silly, right? I mean, probably just the opposite. It would be more serious. But that was one of the things he was so silly. And I remember he was coming to, he was going to visit our family for New Year's Eve. And I told my dad, I'm like, Dad, I met this guy. He's a SEAL, a Navy SEAL. My father was like, he's a Navy SEAL. And I was like, yeah. He's like, he's like a SEAL. And I was like, yeah. I go, so, like, he's like, do you know what a Navy SEAL is? I go, yeah, kind of like a special group. And of course, like, he gave me a dissertation on who and what a Navy SEAL was. And I was just like, I went back to him. I'm like, you didn't tell me about this. Like, you guys are crazy, And so he's like, well, I can't really talk about a lot of stuff I'm doing. And I said to him, like, but you're so silly. Like, you're so silly and funny. I'm like, I think you got to be serious. He's like, oh, we have to be really serious. He's like, honestly. And what he shared with me was, he's like, humor is my outlet and it gives me great energy. And he goes, and when I'm silly and I'm laughing, he's like, that's an outlet. And he goes, it gives me great energy. And he spoke about that. He goes, and it really like maximizes and gives me this great, my breathing and my cadence. And he's like, and that's so important, because he's like, a lot of the stuff that I do, he's like, is underwater. And he's like, breathing is always important. And he said, but especially when you're doing like, and all he could, I remember he would just say like aquatic activities, right? He's like, breathing is really important. So I remember that was, but for him, humor was his release and his energy and his calming method. So, and now we know a lot about SEALs.
Yes. So this next week, I'm starting with a new coach. And I have had financial coaches, I've had fitness coaches, I've had cycling coaches, running coaches, swimming coaches, retirement coach, speaking coach. I can't even think of all the different kinds of coaches I've had over time, and I'm always getting a new
surfing, your new surfing thing.
Coach. Actually, when I restarted surfing after many years of not surfing, I got somebody to help give me some pointers, remind me what I'd long forgotten. It's funny because as a kid, I didn't need a surfing coach. I just got on the board and figured it out. But I'm, in my 50s now, so that's a different exercise.
But Bill, you've got that
little, what's that surfboard called that you got that hovers?
So I started riding a foil board, and I am like going through so I had prone foil to like surf and paddle out, and just like surfing, but then you rise up on the hydrofoil, and then a wing foil where you can use a wing to pull you along. You hold the wing in your hand, a little bit between, say, a kite and a windsurf where the mast is mounted, but you just hold this thing. So hydrofoil with that. And then I just, because when the wind stopped for the season, I bought an electric hydrofoil surfboard that I've been out riding lately, right?
Pretty cool.
I definitely need somebody to teach me how to do that. And I'm starting a new one. If you don't have a coach, shame on you. With the 200 or plus, you're just missing out an opportunity to get stuff. And if you think you can figure it out all on your own, good for you. Actually, you probably don't listen to this show if that's your mentality.
Probably true.
The kind of people who listen. But if it's time for a new coach or an extra coach, we've got 200 coaches in our world that bring all sorts of, we're all scaling up coaches, but then we bring in other tools. Like I'm a Gallup strengths coach as well. And I do a lot of why work, and I do a lot of leadership development with people. And Judy brings a particular marketing background, and I'll forget all what you said about but each of us has some unique stuff that we've got. If you want to reach any of our coach panelists here, I'm putting their contact information both in the crawl at the bottom of the video here, but also in the show notes. So you can find that, and you'll find it on our website as well. And if we can help you find somebody, so it doesn't have to be one of us. We all stay pretty busy overall, and we're looking for the right client that fits our style and the kinds of problems that we like to solve. But with the 200, I or any of us can help you find somebody who's either in your neighborhood or who has that flavor that you need, right? You might not want somebody who rides a foil board and skateboards and listens to music and swears a lot from California.
Who wouldn't want that?
That might be a lot. Well, I can promise you, I had somebody who was a regular listener once talk to me about being a coach. He's like, no, I've been listening to your show forever. You're awesome. You're definitely not my coach. I'm like, great. It's very clear. The show did its job because I don't, but he was interested in some of the other coaches, and we found him someone that fit better. And he worked with them for 2.5 years before changing it up again. So from time to time, it's useful to get a new coach and get some new perspective on what you're doing. And if you don't have that, I recommend you get that sorted right away. I know Karie, Judy, Wade, and I would love to talk to you about if we are a fit for you, or if we could help you find somebody who is.
Yeah.
Also, one of the ways to get started learning kind of the ins and outs, just get started at the scaling up process. You've been listening to the show for a while. You probably want to get in one of our workshops. Do any of you guys have workshops coming up?
Yes.
What do you got, Wade?
I got a workshop on March 4th. Speaking of the Navy SEAL, we're doing it together. So we'll be talking where it's this year's word is focus. And we'll be talking about some of the tools we believe will help you focus in 2021, because we're going to have to bunker down the hatches. Yeah. Focus in and kind of get back to your hedgehog. And then the SEAL is going to talk about some of the small things you can do that make a huge difference in your physical performance, and physical performance leads to business performance every single time. If you're more alert, you're more with it, you're more ready. You get that extra discretionary effort that Judith talked about earlier in the meeting. And that discretionary effort, a lot of it leads to how you physically approach work. So he'll be talking about that. So that'll be March 4th. Yeah, I'd love to have you.
Is it live or virtual?
Both. Unless the governor stops us.
Hybrid. Karie, anything for you?
I'll have one scheduled in Q2, but I don't have the date yet.
Awesome. So Q2 coming up. Watch for Karie. Judy?
I do have one, and we're depending. It's either going to be the first or second week of March. So stay tuned. Probably going to be the second week of March, and it's going to be virtual.
Awesome. Our next one's scheduled for May 27th. I'm thinking now, actually, we're about to schedule a 2 to 4 day thing, a deep dive on each of the decision areas. So instead of the usual half day workshop, we're going to do a master class and go deep on all of them, do some deeper work. And so we'll do layers of that. It's about to be announced. If you want info on that, just drop us an email, info@scalingcoach.com. That masterclass will have 4 distinct sessions for people, strategy, execution, cash. And we'll do a lot deeper dive on that. I've been doing one like every 3 months that's public. And then, of course, the private ones as well with some of our partner organizations. We just did a big one with Vern a couple months ago. We had 700 some registered, and it was exhilarating. We've got another coming up in India. I forget what the other one is, but some very big ones like that. So a range of them. Drop us a note to get on the list if you'd like to be included in that special deep dive. info@scalingcoach.com. Quick reminder, this is a great year and a great time to renegotiate commercial leases, get out of things, go into things, change the terms up, maybe renegotiate early. The demand for these spaces has dropped. The way people use offices is going to get massively reconfigured as people maybe aren't so excited to get back to work, but they're excited to get out of the house, to get away from their kids and spouses and that kind of thing. And they'll be looking for ways to reconnect. Worth looking at, can you renegotiate now? Also, reminder, we've been talking about culture and that kind of thing. I think there's a 1 hour replay with Horst Schultz of the Ritz-Carlton talking about excellence wins and how he grew the Ritz-Carlton when he did there. I loved how he talked about like making people remember the values and principles, making them carry a card in their pocket, making sure they did huddles, being willing to fire general managers of properties where these practices weren't being put in place. So often I see as we go to do scaling up in a company and we start with some of these new traditions and practice, intentional culture and things like that, there's resistance from the team to new things. And you get to look, leader, are you actually committed to this? Are you going to make this mandatory or not? And he was great about, we'll just fire the general manager of the property if they don't do it.
Well, and Bill, we were talking about words matter, right? Right.
Yeah.
What was really important to him that, right, everybody addressed everybody as, right, ladies and gentlemen, right? That was really important, right? And it just made people feel good. And he would, he didn't want people to, hear people say like, hey, how you doing? It was always right, welcome, right? It was just like, warm and inviting, right? And treated everybody equal. And, he gave great examples of how important words are. So, but yeah, it's a fantastic book.
I want to talk about pivoting because I promised it at the top of the show. There's a link. There'll be a link to this Raja juice stand, a 2-minute video. It talks about being different in a street with lots of juice stands. They put theirs in the cup or the source. So if it's coconut juice, you're going to get a half a coconut. If it's a banana, you're going to actually get your juice in a banana, and so on, in a pineapple, etc. And I think that was really great. And then also Catapult Health, one of our scaling up companies that went from planning to have 8 million in a quarter, a pretty typical kind of range that we might have in the scaling up world, and they went to 0 last year. But then they went and they designed the virtual checkup, a way to do your checkup online, and they developed this thing and then they launched it and they did their best month ever and created a huge growth out. And I think our companies last year that pivoted have done the best job of that. Before we run out of time, stories about pivots and adjustments from your teams.
One of my clients, they are a force in the magnet world, every pun intended. And they made, we just made a big pivot from, they were almost stock, unique stock products that they created and they will still continue to do that, but they've really pivoted to a hybrid and a lot more services. They realize just what incredible designers and engineers, as well as in a lot of the spaces that they're in, just the importance of compliance and regulation, which is kind of a pain in the what for a lot of people, and offering to do those service as, they have this new concept of ideation to market. So everything from the design and getting the compliance and regulation and the engineering behind magnets, as opposed to just creating their own kind of end products and selling. So now they're very, very much a hybrid company. And just, we just have a plethora of new verticals that we've gotten into as a result of it. And last year was a fantastic year for them when, a lot of their more stock products people weren't using them because of the pandemic, and because we did switch over to the services and doing things that people didn't like to do. They had another banner year, which was wonderful.
Many clients first had to pivot their operations, and then the offering started to pivot in the last year. And the key thing we emphasize with is looking at trends. Where are things going? Not what are they, I mean, you're first going to look at what's happening right now, especially in a time of dramatic change. But then, all right, so by mid-year, many and more companies will be moving back in person or some hybrid thing. Are you going to go back to the old open bay office that you once had? Probably not. So how are things going to change? What's happening with your customer patterns? Where are they going to go next? Not what's happening right now, but where's it going? These are some of the opportunities and being unique.
Bill, I was going to say one quick pivot that one of my clients made, and they're a not-for-profit. And so I always have 2 not-for-profit clients at any given time, just to pay it forward and do that work it helps the community. And I'm really proud of this one. They're a huge not-for-profit here in West Michigan. Their name's Kids Food Basket, and they deal with food insecurity for kids in school. So, a lot of these schools, the kids will get breakfast and lunch, but they go home to no dinner. And so they did is they built, this is 20 years ago, they built this process of preparing sack suppers, and then they deliver them to the schools. The kids would take it home, and they'd have something to eat at night. And they did an amazing work, and they've grown and grown and grown. Well, as soon as the pandemic hit, I was with them actually when we shut down Michigan, about the same time everybody else did, but in the same time frame. And schools shut down. They were shut down until just last fall, and then they shut down again. But either way, they weren't able to deliver the food, and they pivoted their operations, to your point, not necessarily their offerings, but their operations very, very quickly. And they've been a huge success story. They delivered just as much food, if not more, during the pandemic, during the schools being shut down, and really helped with that food insecurity. And so much so they were recognized, and the First Lady, Dr. Joe Biden, she came by and she saw their operations and was like, we need to put this at a national level. So I love calling them out and giving them props because they've just done such good work. And that's, to me, that was a pivot for good.
Awesome.
And Wade, how important, we were talking before, right, about earlier on about, all the functions that robots can do, and yet let the human being, how many problems are there to solve? I mean, here we are, right, talking in 2021 about people in America who still, don't have kids, who don't have, a home and a dinner to go home to, right? So there's a great example of let robots do what they can do, but what about people like, Wade in that organization solving the problem of hunger locally and abroad. I think that's a great example of that. There's so many problems to solve. So kudos.
So a couple of minutes as we run out of time with our show today. If you'd like to get your operations pivoted and moved online, having some kind of online software accountability can make a difference. So we have the Scaling Up Scoreboard, a purpose-built scoreboard to make that happen. Scalingup.com/software, or also known as Align Today. And then if you'd like to take your learning a little further, I know we recommend specific courses regularly each quarter to our leadership teams from the Growth Institute. And you can take that and go beyond what you have time for in your team days and with your coach, or as a complement to that. They, of course, have their big guns, the Master Business Dynamics course. They have a Scaling Up Master Business class if you're not ready yet to engage a coach and you want to do some of that online learning. And then they've got lots of mini courses, which are the ones that we use the most. So I've got somebody who's wanting to upgrade their hiring. So we just had them watch the Who mini class and start to think about their interviewing process, use of the job scorecard and that kind of thing, in addition to what we taught them. So all that at growthinstitute.com. I want to thank all the coaches, guys, panelists, guys and gals, for joining us this week, this month, and having that conversation and sharing the wisdom, the experience, and the perspective. I think it's better than just hearing me talk all the time.
Bill, you're so good at this. You did a great job. Thanks,
our buddy Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, everyone. If our show helped you, please pass it along to someone else. We like when you give us a review. And if you subscribe to the show and you send us a picture of your subscriber, like you go and you subscribe on iTunes, YouTube, wherever you get it, or on scalingcoach.com, you send us a picture of that, email it to us, info@scalingcoach.com, right? Subscriber. We'll send you a bunch of extra unreleased tools, worksheets and that kind of thing to get you started. So we, of course, love and want to take care of our subscribers first and foremost. I want to give special thanks to Vern Harnish, author and creator of the Scaling Up Framework, and the Rockefeller habits that came before it. Our show is produced, right? All the prep and the pre and post and the behind the scenes is handled by Lucy Summers. Our audio is edited by Albert Burge at Podfly Productions, and our show notes are written and compiled by Ein Kadena, proofread by Tim McGowan. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. Everybody, goodbye. Have a great month. Keep scaling up.